The panelists who we're going to have speaking with us, all of whom are active investors, include from my far right and on your far left, which is not a reflection of our politics, Rob Simmelkjaer, who is the Senior Vice President both of NBC Sports Ventures and Comcast Ventures. So he has been working in NBC Sports as in the people who bring you the regular sports. And then when he's bored with that, he does esports at so on. He's invested recently in GameCake, and Comcast Ventures has been investing in games for at least 10 years. Next to him is Gregory Milken, a co-founder and partner at March Capital Partners. He also has a fair number of personal investments, which, in deference to his partners, we're not going to mention in this introduction. But his investments include GenVid, WaveDash, Enway, and Dojo Madness. Next to him is John Goldman, who has many titles. Venture partner of Greycroft. He is the general partner and I believe founder of GCV Hard Tracker Fund. And he also is the managing director of Skybound, an IP house which has some little-known properties like The Walking Dead. Anyway, his investments include Camera IQ, Gunslinger, and MVP Sports. And next to him, last but not least, is Clinton Foy, general partner and managing director of Crosscut Ventures, which is now on its fourth fund as an LA fund. He's an investor in Super Evil Megacore, Mob Crush, and he is the chairman and founder of the Immortals team, which he also is a co-investor with Gregory. One thing that I commented, for those of you who heard the VC panel about 2 years ago, is that the US had been in a fallow period of investing in games. These things go in waves. But the new epicenter of games investment has been LA. This is the first time that we have the three most active investors in LA in games together on one stage. And also these are people who are all conviction investors. Clinton was at Square Enix before he was a venture capitalist. John had been in the games industry, including Foundation 9 before that. And Gregory claims that he has spent his entire childhood playing games, and his adult life is an extension of his childhood. And Rob is also similarly a serious game player. These are not people who have gone from doing enterprise or Salesforce systems to being able to do games. Right now, we are actually, after the 2011-2000 peak, we are in another cresting wave of game investment because we're now seeing San Francisco starting to follow LA's lead with putting game investments. We're going to focus on the areas that are the most fertile for investment. I'd like to start with esports. Every one of the panelists is invested in the esports category, which has established itself as a business. But as those of you who attended our previous sessions before, there are now obstacles in the way to getting a venture-worthy, that is a 10x return. For example, that the IP owners, such as Riot and Activision, essentially control so much of the audience. So Clinton, can you discuss going forward where you see some of the esports, some of the opportunities in esports, and how you get around those obstacles?
So the opportunity in esports right now, I think maybe you can put into 2 or 3 different buckets. One of them is on the game side, and if you can invest in a Riot Games or a Super Evil Megacorp or one of the leading esports in the world, then that's great. I think you can drop the mic and say you've got a great company. You can invest in the distribution side, like in Twitch or in Mob Crush, or you might hear about Caffeine, which is another streaming platform. Or you can invest in the content and the community aggregation side, which is the teams. And that's where I think we've invested at Crosscut, and me personally, when I founded Immortals and brought on some great top-tier investors like Gregory Milken and AEG and Lionsgate. We wanted to, I think, ride the wave of esports and also really professionalize esports and turn it into a professional ecosystem. And so we've seen a lot of big platforms and a lot of billionaires start to invest in the space in the last year. So I think the opportunity to invest small amounts, maybe a few $1 million, was a few years ago, but now it's become a very mature space very quickly within the last 2 years. And so to get in and to buy into a team, you know, we're talking about a 10, 20, $30 million investment at this stage.
So, all right, Clinton, you've now described why each of those three categories is blocked by major incumbents. So basically, are you done, or where's some new opportunities to look?
I think it's evergreen trying to find great studios and developers and publishers and founders. There are always going to be super passionate founders, and I'm always excited to talk to founders about creating, you know, amazing new games and amazing new experiences. But that's the key, is I think it has to be new. It's not necessarily derivative. There has to be something, some kind of new technology or some kind of a new platform that pushes it forward. Otherwise, I'm not interested really in funding up the next mobile social casual game, even if it could be a very big hit.
Okay, well, let me challenge that, because with Super Evo Megacore, you have a company that started early. You were in them 3-4 years ago. They have a fabulous design team. You retained a terrific investor and an entrepreneur in Christian Segerstral to come in, and still it's taken 4 years to make decent traction. So given that you have a team that's done almost everything, you know, they have almost all the right ingredients, would you really look at somebody, what would you have to, presumably you would play it differently going forward in terms of looking at a studio in esports?
So, I mean, if this is going to be a lessons learned from VCs, I've failed a lot. I've invested a lot. I've learned a lot over the last 4 or 5 years. But I still see the investment in Super Evo Megacorp as one of those good investments that I've made.
I'm sorry. It is one of the good ones, but you had to get almost everything right to make it work.
I mean, I invested and helped to co-lead and lead the seed round 4 years ago. That was my first investment as a VC. And I had conviction in the team, in the tech, in the product, and the potential big market to create mobile esports. And it's taken quite a while, and quite frankly, tens of millions of dollars in those 4 years to really get it to where it is. And now I think it has a chance to really turn into something even more amazing as they launch 5v5 in the next few months. As you know, I think maybe Super Evo Megacorp has Vainglory, started off with 3v3, and has bumped along, helped to launch the iPhone 6, has gotten a lot of press as one of the leaders in esports and mobile esports. But I think the real opportunity is still in the future.
Okay. So Clinton has made a very good case for why there are good investments with the tens of millions category, as you said, with teams, and also what it took to get Super Evo Megacorp to be in position to be a major player. Rob, you are all in you've said you're all in esports, but you also are someone who does things from seed to Series A. So where are you seeing the opportunities in esports, early stage investing going forward?
I think Clinton actually summed up the categories really well. Those 3 categories of game developers, distribution, and teams. I think that as we look at the space, the game side is still probably especially at the seed level, you know, if you're going seed to A, that's certainly where the action is for us. I mean, despite the point that you're making in your conversation with Clinton about how hard it is, and it is really hard to find something that works in that space. Also, look at the esports scene. Look at the fact that you have a game now, PUBG, right? PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, which basically came out of nowhere in a year's time to rival League of Legends as one of the top esports in the world. So it is still possible to go out and find. They may not be in the US, frankly. You may need to look in Asia or other places to find that games team that has something that can really break through. In the case of PUBG, you had a new genre, a new format that just took off. And by the way, that's a game that didn't even come out esports optimized yet. You know, they're still figuring out how to really turn that into an esport. And but the beauty of it is, if you're in early with a team like that as an investor, you can help them figure out how to become an esport. If you have the vision to see something and say, this has potential as an esport, that's something that then, you know, makes you believe that you could have a bit of the next Riot. So I think that's the one. I mean, I think distribution is something that we're absolutely still interested in. But when you see Twitch dropping, you know, $90 million for the Overwatch League, and, you know, really aggressively protecting their flank on esports, it's not clear to me that it's going to be easy. But I think there are certainly opportunities for someone to come along and challenge in different ways. I mean, look at what a Discord has done, right, as a platform, communications tool and platform. So we think there are tools and things like that. At the end of the day, our thesis on esports investing is look for things that the ecosystem needs, but that the publishers are not going to want to do themselves. And that's ultimately the filter that we're looking at.
Which was a very gentlemanly lead-in to one of Gregory's investment in GenVid. Do you want to talk about distribution? You obviously are playing in the distribution and tool set area. So
I mean,
Gregory,
certainly, I would say, you know, I still think that the fan and the spectator from the esports side is underserved in opportunities and things for them to engage with the game beyond just the game itself. So from GenVid's side, they think there's lots of inherent inconsistencies and things that aren't being done well.
Can you just describe GenVid briefly?
Yeah. So coming from the broadcasting side, GenVid Technologies is offering things like different camera angles when you're watching a game stream, click interaction with the stream. So you know, our perspective is that Twitch is great, but a lot of it is just a stream. It's not that interesting. You're watching a game stream, and as a person who likes to interact with games and play games, when you're reviewing something and someone who maybe watches a professional sports event like Monday Night Football, there's lots of bells and whistles that can be put on the broadcast to make it more engaging for a viewer. So I still think there's a lot of opportunity there, and GenVid's attacking that from the camera angle side, from your interaction with the stream, to make it more a compelling experience and create, frankly, more monetization points from the person, the spectator who's just watching the stream. And that's where I think there's a lot of opportunity, is just that we're talking about players who play games, and most of the monetization is happening in competitive games, yet there's many opportunities outside the game itself, whether it's merchandise, you know, whether it's being fans of the players, and feeling like they're involved and engaged with the teams or the game itself or the broadcasts, for people to spend money that just aren't being taken advantage of these days.
Okay, but separate apart from GenVid, where Jacob and Chris have been at it for over 2 years and previously did it as part of Square Enix.
Square Enix.
Yeah, right. So are you willing, do you see opportunities to invest going forward? In other words, would March be looking for investments going forward in the communications and tools and distribution area?
Certainly, definitely. I think broadcast, anything that helps, you know, make the broadcast more engaging or finds ways to leverage the massive amounts of people spectating esports. You know, I think there's a lot of opportunity there, because only so many people can attend in person, and there's millions of people watching online who aren't spending that much yet.
So I actually think that brings up a good point. So you mentioned a few different areas. I think if you look at, I think the ecosystem is even bigger. One area that hasn't been mentioned is sort of sponsorship and media dollars. I mean, big brands are very interested in this area. I invest in a small company called Fan AI that is taking, you know, customer and social data to pinpoint spending patterns and go after other, you know, brands. Most brands think, okay, they want to buy Mountain Dew and you know, caffeine drinks, but the esports player plays or buys a lot of stuff and is actually a pretty good consumer, earns good money, et cetera. So there's sponsorship, there's ticketing, there's lots of different areas. And then I actually think it was an interesting point that you brought up PUBG, particularly after you were talking about Super Mega Evil Corp. So Bluehole did not come out of nowhere. Like, games are, it's a craft. And the Bluehole guys had been making games for years and years, and they sort of learn their craft and learn what worked and didn't work, and then they have this mega hit because they're good at what they do. And I think in the same way, a good team that you nurse over time, like it's a long game investment. It's not a come out of nowhere investment to invest in game studios, but when it hits, it really hits.
No, we call those in the field 10-year overnight sensations. I had the privilege of working with Ilka and Rico on Sumea, the company before Supercell, but
right.
But
I mean, they did a lot of stuff, so you have to have the pieces.
But they had learned most of their lessons, and in fact, their first Supercell game, which was Gunlight or something like that, failed, and then they did Clash of Clans, which was their battleground. Anyway, I'm going to move on from esports because we're going to take the other topic that was a big one the last 2 years, which is going to be a short discussion, which is VR. When venture capital pours in record numbers, and globally there were over 350 investments in VR companies, and it is a smoking ruin, like what has happened in the last year, it usually takes the VC industry about 2 to 3 years before they are willing to do a next wave, a minimum of 2 to 3 years before they're willing to go into a next wave. I'm going to give a talk tomorrow night about business and venture, tomorrow afternoon about business and venture realities. We'll discuss VR. But is anyone on this panel willing to be a contrarian on VR?
Yeah, I'll be a contrarian.
Please.
So I think smoking ruin is a bit extreme. I think it's hard to live up to, the level of hype, but there are real dollars being spent. And I think certainly just looking at the games industry, the compulsion for immersion is real. And you've got, Sony sold another 5 million units. So what are we at? Like 65 million units of just PlayStation. So any attach rate there can be a meaningful business. I think there are lots of good enterprise opportunities. I've invested in a couple of healthcare opportunities that are doing well, and we're actually looking now at a large business presentation company that has $20+ million in real revenue. So will a lot of VCs be scared away from this area? Yeah, sure. It was overinvested in, but it's not a smoking ruin. It's just, it's a real business that's taking time to get its sea legs.
Sorry, I should clarify that John and I are mostly arguing in violent agreement. I was referring to a smoking ruin in terms of the venture field. Obviously, the platforms are still spending billions of dollars. Oculus Rift has a small little company called Facebook backing them up.
Right,
Samsung.
Well, but also people are buying stuff. So obviously when people invest in, okay, so I make this joke all the time that I would never invest behind my 23-year-old daughter. And I love her and think she's really smart. But what you saw happening is a bunch of, ill-formed businesses getting massive valuations based on hype. And then, of course, there's no surprise that it doesn't live up to the dream.
So, Rob?
I'll just throw something out. I'm curious what people think. Maybe the problem with the VR investment cycle is that people invested in use cases that were too far afield from the core too early. Because I think everybody agrees that gaming is a core use case for VR and AR as well, and a very compelling one. And maybe you needed to bake in that core oven a little bit longer before the investment started to go so far afield from that into sports and general entertainment and enterprise and all these other things. Maybe, or enterprise, some enterprise use cases are quite compelling, but maybe that is one of the issues, and maybe the answer is that future investments, at least in this sort of downslope, should be more focused on core use cases to prove that out, to sort of separate good technology from not good technology, and then let the expansion run at a more natural pace.
Clinton or Gregory?
I'm actually very long-term bullish on VR, I think, but my time horizon for it is more like 5 to 10 years out, not 1 to 2 years out. And I think you have to just have a super strong consumer adoption that happens in the tens and hundreds of millions, like with console cycles, like with PlayStation and with Xbox, with the Nintendo. You have to have, when I was at Square Enix, we didn't have a mature console cycle until you were at least 20, 25 million units that you could sell in. And so we're not there yet, but I fully believe that within 3 to 5 years, we'll definitely be there. And there'll be great opportunities then. It's just going to take a while. You have to have a long time horizon. That's all.
I agree with Clinton. I mean, I think also you need consumer awareness and adoption of what the experience is and what they're going to get for them to want to bring it in the home. I mean, I think we're going to see success as we are in location-based VR. And as more people experience that, then they'll want it in the home. And so then it'll come back to the home. So, you know, once people get aware of what the compelling experience is and why they should purchase hardware and bring it into the home, probably through going to malls or movie theaters or other locations, then they're going to demand it. So I think we're a few years away from that.
So whether or not, just to summarize and move on, whether you take the 2 to 3 years I started with or the 3 to 5 years that Clinton mentioned, the point is that you should expect to see very little VC investment in VR for the next let's say the next 2 years, I think. And by the way, John, of course, immersion is a fundamental human need. And we're going to get all sorts of, if it could only happen when Ready Player One comes out in March and we see a glorious, Steven Spielberg, great special effects version. But in any event, for those of you who are considering businesses right now in VR, it's going to be hard to raise money. God bless you if you are determined and have a great idea, but be prepared for a certain amount of resistance, even from John. Moving on to AR. This is, by the way, the next, for those of you who enjoyed the first disagreement that John and I have, let's go to the second disagreement that we're going to have. So in AR, my contention has been that Pokemon Go is an irreproducible event, except by Niantic, which will be able to do it in Harry Potter. And also going forward, we are now in the stage with AR where various competent platforms are trying to prove that theirs is going to be the answer. Apple with ArtKit, Microsoft with HoloLens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. John, you've made a recent investment in AR, so can you discuss the landscape for AR in games in the near future?
Sure. So let me start with the initial contention that, so from my standpoint, Niantic trained a lot of people to play geospatial games, and that geospatial game does not encompass everything that we might be able to do with AR. And so as more game makers play around with the system, I've never seen a game platform, if it is indeed a platform, that there are no other hits that follow. There are things that we can't imagine. I've not invested in an AR game. I did invest in a company called Camera IQ, which is doing sort of AR tools, and it's kind of like an authoring platform. So probably their best known installation was the festival at Coachella, and very dynamic entrepreneurs who are great at pitching business, and then just anecdotally and separately taking off, this sort of Greycroft and GC Tracker hat. My experience at Skybound, we just launched 2 AR-enabled. Actually, I see Dean is here. I actually don't know if this is announced, but we've got some consumer products that have AR with them, and have had a fabulous response. So I think the level of creativity that we'll see is going to continue to evolve, and it's, again, just like the issue with VR. When you have such a tremendous hit as Pokemon Go, it sometimes sets expectations beyond what is reasonable, but there's still a lot of great outcomes below $900 million in 1 year that investors should be very excited about.
Okay, one quick thing. Pokemon Go was based on a game that was a poor game, Ingress, or at least it was a poor game by uptake. So they have improved it. Are you going to say, is there an opportunity there to do a good game now that Pokemon Go has shown that the audience can be there?
I actually think that they'll do a very good game with Harry Potter. I know the Niantic guys pretty well. They're very committed and dogged. The CEO and team there are smart, and it's not just about financial success for them. So I expect them to, just like we talked about with Bluehole or others, I think they've had an amazing success, but they're very ambitious people who want to do more than just make money.
Oh yeah, well Hanky has made a huge amount of money from his sale to Google, and also.
I think Pokemon Go probably did all right for him too.
You think?
Yeah.
And then also he was Meridian 59, so
He was what?
He was Meridian 59, so he's been in games he was in games 20 years ago.
Huh.
Yeah, he was part of the early MMO, the MMO group.
Well,
the contemporary of Ultima Online.
Educational moment.
So there's game DNA in that company.
Yeah.
Does one of the other panelists want to speak to the prospects for AR games? Gives John some help. The moderator's bullying him. Clinton, you didn't move fast enough.
Listen, I think if you have a great game like Pokemon Go, and I think also Harry Potter is going to be a great AR geolocated game, I think you're going to have copycats, and there's going to be a decent amount of funding and a decent amount of interest in that space. We saw that after Pokemon Go, but we also didn't see anything really take off after that. I think until you have maybe some of that core team split off, or some of those other people start to found games teams that want to do that, then you're going to be dealing with a lot of other issues, like the underlying technology and the Google Maps technology that underlies Niantic. I think it's going to be really difficult to reproduce. But I am an eternal optimist, and I think that there are going to be, one or two other games out there that really take off, and game studios that take off in that space. I would think so. I would definitely take Peaches. I mean, that's what we do. That's our job, is to look for those opportunities and for those outliers, for those idiosyncratic returns. And so I would not turn one of those down and say, I don't think that you can reproduce that with Pokemon Go. That's not my job to bet against that.
By the way, a side note, if you are pitching a VC and you want to know if they want to be in games, Clinton mentioned one of the most important qualifications, optimist. This is not like enterprise sales. This is something where someone there is some unknowable element. You can't say, we know that, Battleground is going to be a huge hit, or this untried heyday is going to be a great hit. Optimist is something that each of these gentlemen have in their resume. It is something you should always look for. We have seen the VCs who perform poorly in games have generally been the ones who've done very well in enterprise or Salesforce things have not generally done well, because they're used to dealing with a much more quantifiable set of immediate results. Moving on, let's talk about optimism. Let's go to the optimism conversation. The single most frequent pitch that a game VC receives is my great game or my great game studio. And on a percentage basis, VCs tend to turn down an extraordinary number of them. But Gregory, by evidence, by investing in Enway, you obviously are willing to invest in a game studio in a mature game medium. Is this a one-off event, or is there reason to believe you're going to do more?
No, it's not a one-off event. I mean, we talk about what's the big win here. Most of the time, the big win is content and IP. So, I think as a VC, you're taking risk, and not all these are going to turn out. But if we want to win big, I think we have to be investing in game studios that create their own IP, create their own game tech. Because those are going to be the companies that really win and become billion-dollar companies. Enway, for an investment for us, was fantastic tech to allow player versus player, synchronous fighting on mobile devices, layered with at the time we came in, the Power Ranger IP on top of that. So it was a very compelling case. So we'll definitely be looking at opportunities like that. We also invested in Wavedash, who believes there's opportunity in the platform fighter space, because Nintendo doesn't really support Super Smash Brothers as an esport. So we think there's a wide open window there. And got other personal investments in the space, so I definitely think there's still opportunity. You're going to see game studios rise up, every few years, and someone's going to hit it big, and we want to be part of that.
Okay, so you're willing to do mobile. What about some of the, and also console?
I think I'm a little more skeptical on console, but just because of the choke points, that Microsoft, Sony, or Nintendo have. But definitely, interested in mobile and PC based because I think it's easy to get to the audience in those ways and win.
Okay, John and Rob, you both have different cases for being willing to consider them console.
Well, I guess when we were talking out there, this is one where I'm actually in agreement in terms of, targeting those platforms. I like console teams. I like teams. So that's really more of what I meant is that in general, we've seen in every platform from the, Jamdat days to now what we're seeing with, companies like Scopely or Supercell or whoever, that gaming always moves more core. And the teams with great experience making core games have been making those games, on console, and then some of them migrated to PC because that's a place where they could publish for themselves. And I think we'll start to see increasing free-to-play game mechanics come to the harder core games. So it's harder to, in mobile, there was this whole period where you could sort of learn your monetization chops on casual and move upstream. But it's very hard to sort of move completely upstream to the most core games without having teams that are experienced making games for those super fans. So that's what I'm interested in is those sort of solid teams that may have been around for 10, 15 years, but not necessarily just pitching to Sony and Xbox.
Rob, what platforms are you most interested in? And by the way, please make a distinction if it's your Comcast hat or your NBC hat.
Well, mostly I'm speaking with my Comcast Ventures hat on this panel, but I can talk to both. I would agree with Greg. I think mobile first, no question about it. PC to a lesser degree, but absolutely, and then console. Console for us, with my NBC Sports hat on, and with the sports landscape, a lot of that has lived on console. EA Games and Take-Two, and you're seeing more leagues like the NBA go into managed esports events and tournaments that rely on those games. And so, in that sense, you do end up in the console world a lot when we're looking to create, commercial opportunities around sports. But I think when it comes to developers, those are the priorities. We also, with the Comcast Ventures hat on, we took a flyer on, you mentioned this company GameCake, which is developing for connected TV devices. Now that's not a platform that has a lot of history of success. There aren't really any success stories there, but we decided to roll the dice on that because number one, we are in the television business, and not just NBC, but Comcast is focused more and more on games. With their X1 platform, looking to launch games on that platform. So we thought someone with the DNA and the ability to develop games specifically for the TV environment, really mostly party games sort of things, or like Jackbox, but via the connected TV angle, we thought was interesting. And then we just also like the founder, who's a guy who's ex-Disney Games, so we decided to give that a go. But still, I think you're going to see the bell curve, the vast majority of investing, in mobile and PC.
It's worth repeating because all these gentlemen are saying it. They always look for the good team and the experienced team. That is one of the first things that experienced VC looks for. Mm-hmm. I want to go back to what you said about mobile, Rob. One of the things that I and the CEO of Pixelberry observed is that in 2016 and 2017, mobile was about as red an ocean as you can get. Only 2 companies that were independents were able to stick in the top 50 for more than 4 months. And that was Playrix, which is the Russian company that's performed better than almost than any independent, and Pixelberry, which has now been taken off the table with Nexon. So, given that, you're obviously seeing a change going. You and Gregory are obviously seeing a change going forward. Are there any particular areas in mobile? Are you looking for different play patterns than, let's say, Match 3 and builder games? I mean, are there any particular areas in mobile that you can tell our audience that you think are the most fertile?
I mean, being a hardcore gamer myself, I'm always interested in games that appeal more to the mid-core hardcore player rather than the casual player. I think those people monetize very well, so anything as mobile, continues to offer more tech, and be capable of doing more things that offer a deeper, engaging experience, for people to, really be sucked into a world, is appealing to me. So anything that targets more the hardcore gamer on mobile is interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, I was at CES last week, and 5G was a hot topic of conversation. And so as you start to see a mobile infrastructure develop where you can do so much more, especially so much more on a synchronous basis in mobile gaming, and then obviously you see devices becoming more and more advanced. I think you've got a lot of opportunity for mobile games that look more like PC games did some number of years ago. And so for us, part of the equation there is there a competitive gameplay angle here? Is there an esports angle, like Super Evil, that we think can succeed? And I think that's where obviously the big studios are going to be the big studios for a long time, but I think there are opportunities for newcomers who are really good at game dynamics that allow competitive gameplay and make for esports opportunities can potentially get a foothold.
Thank you. Switching from one of the mature media, let's choose one of the newest, which is the blockchain. Just briefly, there has been a lot of news reported, including by Dean, about ICOs, which are a way to raise capital as opposed to building things of the blockchain. And there have been relatively few. One of the interesting things is that ICO has to work within 24 hours and sometimes as little as an hour, as opposed to a blockchain play where you get the end result, which is a coin, which has to show value over a period of time. Fortunately, the games business, has been in the business of creating virtual value for 20, 30 years. In fact, the first economist was hired by CCP, EVE Online, 18 years ago. So, John, you've made some recent stealth investments in blockchain. So I don't need to. Obviously, you can't talk about the companies, but can you tell us where you see opportunities in blockchain and games?
Sure. So I think that one, if you can separate the money part of it, because I think that's gotten all the attention around ICOs. That one of the most interesting things for gameplay is the distributed ledger. So it's really a truth mechanism that allows people to share digital goods or other things in different ways. So a couple of the company, one company I invested in is doing sort of an arbitrage between crypto mining and digital goods, and that's just a very simple play. But another company is sort of backing and protecting digital goods with the blockchain, which I think solves a huge issue around collecting at a high price. So we're all familiar with people, and you were talking about a little bit, your son who will buy an action figure or something, and I've experienced, a world of superfans who will pay hundreds or thousands of dollars for physical goods that are made out of silicone or rubber. And the main thing that drives these people buy the physical goods is the scarcity, value, and provenance. And that's been a problem in digital goods, which have sold, in large quantity for small amounts. But if you actually want to see real collectors spending real money, the blockchain can actually help them solve that, because it treats those issues. You have the scarcity, that there may be only 500 of these made, and it treats the provenance, so that if I resell something to somebody and they resell it by the time that Clinton buys it, he doesn't need to know who those people are. They can remain anonymous, but he can know that there is a transaction record that protects the value and scarcity behind that digital good. So those are areas aside from the money part that I find compelling.
Right. Cory Doctorow, the futurist, argues that the internet is the world's largest copying machine, which is the issue you're dealing with. And a ledger means that, in effect, you're guaranteeing the integrity of visual.
And you're
virtual
spreading
object.
that ledger. It's not, you know, one ledger in somebody's office. It's so if somebody tries to do something fraudulent, it triggers an alert on everyone else's ledger.
And this is crucial because we've assumed that any virtual, you know, that there have been many examples in Asia of things being hacked and so on, and essentially value being destroyed. And even, you know, in the early days of online, when I was in online games with John Hankey, once the servers could be, we saw the servers were our protection, but now the servers can be routinely hacked. We don't have it. It's a huge game because you've just created a lot of value for for everyone who deals with virtual objects, not just game players. Anyone else with some insight into blockchain that they wish to share? Or opportunities that you see?
So this is an area that I'm fascinated by, and you know, having been a long time proponent and advocate and creator of digital goods and virtual goods, all the way back through Final Fantasy XI. It's something that we've been tracking and been seeing a lot more of this last year with blockchain, and it's a way to create anti-counterfeiting measures but still have, as John said, creating scarcity value in a particular good, and then being able to sell and transact in that good or that virtual good across the world almost at any time. And that's something, and across platforms, that's something that's really interesting. I'm tracking this one company called CryptoKitties, which some people might have heard about, and you know, there are CryptoKitties that are selling for tens of thousands of dollars, in some case much more than that. I think $20 million has gone into the CryptoKitties market already, or possibly even more at this stage. And it's built on Ethereum, it's built on the blockchain, and I think this is the first experiment in a lot more games built on blockchain that we're going to be seeing that are distributed, that are also really have a bright future, because this is one use case that we're only going to see a lot more of, I think. I'm super fascinated and definitely want to look at more of those kinds of games.
Good. And I assume that you own a number of CryptoKitties. Anyway, we're going to have one more question to the panelists, and then we'll take a few questions from the audience. As mentioned earlier, this is the first gathering of the three most prolific venture investors in games in Los Angeles. Two comments about LA, one from the venture side and one from the LA side. This is at least the third wave of venture firms in Los Angeles. And in the previous two waves, most of them have basically washed away after the dot-com bubble or after the other crash. So great names like Clearstone and Shelter are no longer around. Obviously, you gentlemen are all in for are asserting you're in for the long run. You raised 7 or 10 year funds, and you're now in your fourth fund. But tell us why this time is different. I'd like to start with John, because Greycroft has had an office that has been in Los Angeles for at least 10 years, and you've been investing in games for at least 5 and I think 6 or 7.
Well, Greycroft is a pretty broad-based firm. So I think number one, there's just that longevity that will likely continue. So games is just one sector we invest in, but I think we were early proponents that it's a real business, and there's obviously, you know, if you look at the, you know, media landscape, which, you know, I'm sure Rob is spending a lot of time doing, it's, you know, it continues to be the most exciting place in media where you can build really outsized returns. So Greycroft has invested in a lot of consumer-facing technologies, whether games or you know, consumer plays. We're very active in e-commerce. So I think one through line for all these things is that they're industries that have been affected by the transformation from, you know, retail sales to direct sales, because games are very much now a form of direct selling. They used to be a consumer packaged good, and so it fits in with everything we're doing. And then I'm not the only experienced person at the firm. You know, Dana Settle, Mark Terbeek, Paul Brico, Ian Sigalo in New York. These are all names that have been looking at games for a long time. So there's I'm not just the sort of outlier, you know, kooky game guy. There's a lot of people with conviction around the space and some successes to back up that conviction.
Yeah, that's, well, for instance, I mean, obviously with Alan Patercroft, you have one of the longest serving active investors in the field.
I mean, you know, yeah.
He did 40, but he also has stayed away from games. So I was asking about, the most important thing is that you have several in the LA office, Brico and Settle, in addition
and
to...
Turbik.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
So it's useful to know that that's one of the answers. You have four partners or venture partners who are in that. Gregory.
And then Ian Sigalo plays games in New York. Like we've got this, you know, like Ian Sigalo, I don't know how he finds the time, you know, might on a given day play, you know, more than I do. It's just, it's part of the investment focus of the firm, and I'm sure it's not going to change.
But the LA. Gregory, you said you're the geeky games guy. Do you have any support within March? Well,
I mean, certainly I have the support of my partners, you know, and you know, what I do and experience and advice. But I mean, also for LA, I don't think you can discount the fact the number of game companies that are here, besides the investors, and what's happening on the esports side. When you look at what's happening in the next year, and you have Riot's franchise league, you have, you know, the Overwatch franchise league, and you've got 22, I think, you know, teams residing here for the next 12 months, competing in the esports space and having matches every week. That's huge in terms of market, in terms of products and services that have come out and around that. I think, you know, what's happened now is, you know, gaming is mainstream. When I look at what my kids do on a daily basis, my 8-year-old, he would rather go to, you know, an Overwatch match than go watch the Lakers play. So it's like a sea change in how people and kids view entertainment and what they're doing and watching stuff on Twitch. And the basis for that in, you know, the U.S. and North America is LA with Riot, Activision, Blizzard, and where that's happening. So, you know, we're here for, you know, forever, because that's where we want to be, and LA is where it's happening.
To elaborate on what Gregory said, it's not just that LA has been an epicenter of esports, but it was also an epicenter of VR. I did describe VR as a smoking ruin, but the important thing is when a ton of money came in, more of it settled in LA than San Francisco. And that promises, well, that the next medium will see. LA may not be as much of a leader as, you know, you can't assume it's going to be the leader every time, but it's one of the candidates where it wasn't in the previous. And that suggests some permanency. Clinton, you've obviously been investing in games for a while. What about your what about your firm?
So Crosscut has been around since 2008, and even the founders of Crosscut have been investing in the LA ecosystem since well before that, since the late 1990s. And I think within the last 5 years, since I joined Crosscut, we've made games and LA and content, I think, a big focus for Crosscut. And it's important to us to support the LA ecosystem. We'll continue to probably fund, out of our $125 million fund that we just raised, roughly 60% of that are going to be investments in LA and Southern California. We'll still, of course, invest in Silicon Valley and New York and Seattle, but we are a seed stage fund and we invest in the LA ecosystem, and that's important to us. I agree with Gregory that, you know, we are very long LA, and I think LA is a special time and a special place right now, not just with Riot, not just with Activision Blizzard, but also with all the studios. We're at Disneyland now. Disney is a huge powerhouse, Warner Brothers, you know, Fox. We have all of these incredible platforms that are also spinning off creative talent and engineering talent. You have Snapchat. You also have offices with Google setting up offices in YouTube and Facebook, and all of those production companies as well, special effects companies. And you just don't have that same kind of, I think, center of gravity at any other place in the world right now.
So, gentlemen, can I have a commitment from the three of you, when the next market correction shows up, that you will show up and face the audience the year after that occurs in LA?
Super comfortable with failure.
Great. Thank you, John. That's a great answer. And Rob, in terms of Comcast, while you've had now, there's now a history of passing the baton between partners and so on. But are you going to, you are now the game partner. Are there any other people who are going to be looking at games in your firm?
So, yes. Starting with LA, we opened up an office in Santa Monica within the last year. A partner named Dinesh Morjani, who was a co-founder of Tinder, among many other successes, is leading that office. Not entirely, but certainly in part focused on games. So that's everything that these gentlemen said about the LA ecosystem is why Comcast, which, Comcast Ventures, so everyone knows, while it's obviously connected with, your cable company, is a financial investor. So we are looking at investments from financial returns point of view, and games has become increasingly important to us as a fund. I started out about a year and a half ago, just being the first person since Andrew Cleveland to really start talking about games at Comcast Ventures. And now between that, what we're doing at NBC Sports, and the commitment that the company has made to esports by buying the Overwatch League franchise for Philadelphia, there's increasing momentum to do things around games and esports. So we're still in the first inning, quite frankly. I'm definitely the baby on this stage in terms of actually having done games investments, but you're going to see it coming. You're going to see it coming out of our LA office, myself, and then there's Kai Bond, who's a colleague of mine based in New York. The two of us will be out in LA and San Francisco a lot looking at opportunities.
So will you be implementing a swipe left and right investment committee process?
That sounds great.
Okay.
You
John
say swipe left and right, you mean?
John asked you for the easy
the Tinder.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
Right.
Sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll work with that with Dinesh on that. Yeah.
John asked you for the easy commitment. For the people who are Los Angelinos, can you or Dinesh or Kai try and make sure that when these gentlemen are back here after the next global market correction, that you'll have made one investment with one of the three people on the stage? That's your to-do list after this this task over here.
We'll drag him down.
Right. There's three of you and one of him, so I like the odds. Questions from the audience? Okay, so first question, pre-revenue. Do you invest in pre-revenue game studios? Second is in what form?
Yes, definitely invest in pre-revenue. What form? I think it depends on what the stage of investment is. I mean, if you're raising enough money that's a Series A, we're going to do equity.
Give a range. What?
$3 to $5 million. If you're hitting that level, it's going to be an equity play for us at March Capital Partners. If you're raising $1 million or less, convertible notes, but that's not often where we're really going to play as a firm at March Capital Partners.
John, you cover both ends of the spectrum between GC and Greycroft. Do you have a similar answer, Tim, or?
I mean, I think most firms prefer a priced round. It depends how much, the benefits of like a convertible note or, less desirable a safe, which is very popular in Silicon Valley, is that it's just like dead simple to do.
And there's things like this. By the way, you should look for Series C, the Series C documents, seriesc.com, which are forms that have been done to make VC stuff simple, and it will do that. Also, you ought to look at the stuff that has been put out by some of the early stage, seed stage funds, which have actually put out, how to and what people generally do. I mean, so this information is available. Clinton, do you have a similar answer?
So, I mean, it's a general question. I mean, it really depends on the team. I mean, when you're pre-revenue and you're early stage, my analysis really goes into, okay, is this a team that has the experience and I think the guts to be able to pound through this for the next, few years to turn this into a great, big opportunity? And the simple answer is, for 99% of those games companies, it's probably not a good fit for us. But we'll still try and be helpful. Maybe it's a friends and family round that you want to do, or maybe it's those alternative forms of financing that you can find.
So I don't know how you feel, but I think at this stage of, particularly around mobile games, that the marketplace is so crowded that unless you've got a CEO and team with not only good game development capabilities, but a real view in hypothesis about how to make money, that it's just too hard to invest in, you know, pre-revenue mobile companies, because there's so much that's, you know, like, you have to take it as a given that somebody can make an awesome game, but if they don't have a view on how they're going to make money, I think it's just too risky.
Thank you for asking a question that caused us to run over time. With that, I'd like to thank Rob, Gregory, John, and Clinton for appearing, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you.